I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. As a kid, I used to spend hours reading books about ghost and haunted houses, and I was always the first one to suggest a spooky game of Ouija board with my friends. But I never really believed in any of it, you know? It was just a fun, creepy pastime. That is, until I moved into my new apartment. At first, everything seemed fine. It was a small studio in a decent neighborhood, and the rent was affordable. But as the days went by, I started to notice things that were off. Small things at first, like objects moving on their own, or strange noises coming from the walls. I brushed it off as my imagination and tried to focus on unpacking and settling in. But then, things started to escalate. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find my furniture rearranged or my possessions scattered around the room. My phone would ring at odd hours, with no one on the other end. And worst of all, I started to see things. Shadows moving in the corner of my eye, or shapes that disappeared as soon as I turned to face them. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe it was stress from the move, or lack of sleep. Maybe I was just losing my mind. But the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. The temperature in my apartment would drop suddenly, sending shivers down my spine. Sometimes I could hear faint whispers, like someone was trying to speak to me from beyond the grave. I knew I had to do something. I reached out to a few paranormal investigators I found online, hoping they could shed some light on what was happening. They arrived one evening, armed with equipment and eager to explore. As soon as they entered the apartment, they could feel it too. The energy in the air was heavy and oppressive, like a weight on their chest. They set up their equipment and began to investigate. At first, nothing happened. We sat in silence, watching the monitors and waiting for something to manifest. But then, we heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the closet. We all held our breath as one of the investigators approached the closet door. Slowly, he opened it, revealing nothing but a few coats and shoes. But as soon as he stepped closer, the scratching grew louder. And then, suddenly, the door slammed shut on its own. We all jumped back, startled, and then it happened. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that we could see our breath in the air. And then a voice spoke out. A low, guttural voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Get out! We didn't need to be told twice. We gathered our things and fled the apartment, shaking and terrified. But as we left, I could feel something watching us. Something angry and vengeful that didn't want us there. I never went back to that apartment again. I couldn't bring myself to even think about it without feeling a sense of dread. But even now, years later, I still wonder what it was that was haunting me. Was it a ghost or something even more sinister? And if it was trying to communicate with me, what did it want? I may never know the answers to those questions, but one thing is for sure, I'll never underestimate the power of the paranormal again. I heard about the abandoned asylum for years, but never had the courage to explore it myself. That all changed when my friend, Mike, suggested we check it out one night. At first, I was hesitant. The stories I had heard were enough to make anyone's skin crawl. Rumors of patients being mistreated, experiments gone wrong, and even reports of ghosts haunting the place. But Mike was insistent, saying that it would be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We arrived at the asylum just after midnight, parked our car a safe distance away and walked up to the rusted gates. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as we entered the desolate grounds. The building loomed before us, its windows broken and boarded up. We tried to push open the front doors, but they wouldn't budge. It was clear we would have to find another way in. We circled the building, looking for a way to climb up to a higher floor. That's when we saw it, a broken window on the second floor, with a rusted fire escape ladder leading up to it. Mike went up first, followed by me. We climbed up the ladder, the sound of the metal rungs creaking under our weight. I couldn't help but feel like we were making a huge mistake. But I didn't want to show any fear in front of Mike. Once we reached the broken window, we climbed through it and landed on the floor of an abandoned hallway. The air was musty and damp, and the only light came from our flashlights. As we walked down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floors were littered with debris. We explored room after room, finding evidence of the asylum's past, old medical equipment, patient files, and even a padded cell. As we continued our exploration, I started to feel increasingly uneasy. It wasn't just the creepy atmosphere, but something else. It was like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. That's when we heard it. A faint whispering coming from down the hall. It was too quiet to make out any words, but it sent shivers down my spine. Mike was excited, saying it was probably just the wind or our imaginations playing tricks on us. But I knew better. I could feel something watching us, waiting to pounce. We continued down the hall, our flashlights illuminating the way. As we turned a corner, we came face to face with a group of patients. Their eyes glazed over and their bodies contorted into unnatural positions. I froze in terror, unable to speak or move. Mike, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed. He walked up to one of the patients, trying to engage them in conversation. That's when I realized the truth. Mike was one of them. He had been possessed by whatever dark force haunted the asylum, and now it was coming for me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Mike's maniacal laughter echoing through the halls as I sprinted towards the exit. I made it outside, collapsing on the ground in exhaustion. As I caught my breath, I realized that Mike was nowhere to be seen. As a matter of fact, that was the last time I've ever seen or heard from Mike. I never returned to the asylum again, but sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the whispers and the laughter echoing in my mind, reminding me of the horror that lurked within those abandoned walls. I'm an unmarried woman in her late 40s. I don't have a family of my own, no kids. Both parents passed away, and I was an only child. I came to accept the reality that I would die alone, and to make the most of my years left here on Earth. It all started when I moved into my new house, my dream home. It was a beautiful old mansion with tall ceilings, intricate woodwork, and stained glass windows. It was everything I had ever wanted in a home. But it wasn't long before strange things started happening. At first, it was just small things. Objects moving on their own, strange noises in the middle of the night. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but it soon became impossible to ignore. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I got out of bed and went to investigate, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, getting louder and closer, until they were right behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. That's when I started seeing things. Shadowy figures lurking in the corners of my vision, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at them. Strange symbols appearing on the walls, written in what looked like blood. And the dreams, terrible, vivid nightmares that left me waking up in a cold sweat. I tried to ignore it all, but it was like the house was alive, and it was determined to make me suffer. One night, I woke up to find my bed shaking violently, as if something was trying to drag me under it. I screamed for help, but no one came. That's when I decided to do some research on the history of the house. I found out that it had been built in the early 1900s by a wealthy family who had a reputation for dabbling in the occult. They had held seances and rituals in the house, and some even claimed that they had made contact with the other side. That's when I realized that the house was cursed. The spirits of the family and their followers were still lingering, trapped in the house, and they were determined to make me suffer. I tried to leave, but the house wouldn't let me go. Every time I packed my bags and got ready to leave, something would happen. The doors would lock themselves, the windows would shatter, the lights would flicker and die. I was trapped, and the only way out was to face the spirits head on. I spent weeks researching exorcism and spiritual cleansings, and I even hired a priest to come and bless the house. But nothing worked. The spirits were too strong, too determined to hold on to their home, and so I resigned myself to my fate. I would spend the rest of my life in that cursed house, tormented by the spirits of the past. And then, one night, I woke up to find the house completely silent. No footsteps, no whispers, no strange symbols on the walls. It was like the spirits had finally moved on, leaving me alone in the empty house. But I knew better than to trust it. The spirits were still there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And so, I sit here in my empty, cursed house, waiting for the next attack, knowing that it could come at any moment. It started with a knock at my door. It was late at night, and I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened the door, there was no one there, just a small package on the ground. I picked it up and brought it inside. It was a plain brown box with no return address or markings. I shook it, but it didn't make any noise. Curiosity got the best of me. I opened it up. Inside was a single cassette tape. Again, there was no label or markings of any kind. I had a strange feeling about it, like I shouldn't play it, but I couldn't resist. I popped the tape into my old cassette player and pressed play. At first, there was nothing but static, but then a voice, distorted and scratchy, began to speak.
Hello, my dear friend. I hope this message finds you well. I have a special task for you, one that only you can complete. You see, I've been watching you, studying you, and I know that you have what it takes to complete this task.
I sat there, transfixed, listening to the voice on the tape. It was like it was speaking directly to me.
I won't tell you what the task is, not yet, but I will give you a clue. Look outside your window.
I hesitated for a moment, but then I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains. Outside, there was a small cardboard box sitting on my doorstep. It looked like it had been hastily taped shut. I opened the box and found a small notebook inside. It was filled with cryptic messages and drawings, all seemingly related to the task I had been assigned. Over the next few weeks, I received more packages, even one containing clues and instructions for the task. At first, it was harmless things like solving puzzles and deciphering codes, but as the days went on, the task became more and more sinister. One day, I was instructed to break into a local store and steal a specific item. Another day, I was told to harm someone, to leave them with a permanent injury. I didn't want to do it, but something inside me compelled me to follow through. I had invested so much of my time and effort into the task that I had to know what the outcome was. Then one day, I saw a man standing on a tall ladder painting the exterior to his shop. I saw this as an opportunity to complete my morbid task. As I walked by the ladder, I pretended to slip and fell toward the ladder, knocking the man down. I heard his bones break as he fell on the concrete. He was screaming in pain as I pretended I was shocked and kept apologizing. I called an ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital. I felt bad for him, but I also felt relieved that I finally got this task over with. It wasn't until I received a package containing a knife that I realized what was happening. The voice on the tape had taken control of me, and I was nothing more than a puppet in its twisted game. But I couldn't stop. The voice had become a part of me, a constant presence in my mind. It whispered to me at all hours, urging me to complete the next task, to prove my worth. I tried to fight it, to ignore it, but it was too strong. And then, one day, the voice told me the final task.
You've done well, my dear friend. But there is one more task you must complete. It is the most important of all. You must sacrifice someone you love. Only then will you be worthy.
I was horrified. I didn't want to hurt anyone, let alone someone I loved. But the voice was insistent. It was all-consuming, all-powerful. And so I did it. I lured my best friend to my house under the guise of a friendly visit. And then I did the unthinkable. I murdered him, just as the voice had instructed. I remember feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I plunged the knife into their chest. It was like a weight had been lifted off of me, like I had finally accomplished something great. But as I stood there, covered in blood, the reality of what I had done set in. I had murdered my best friend. Also, the voice had disappeared. The feeling of accomplishment quickly turned into remorse. I ran out of my house, just trying to get away from everything. A few hours later, a cop car pulled up to me while I was walking alongside the road. 2 police officers came out of the car with their guns drawn, yelling at me to put my hands up. My neighbors saw me run out of the house covered in blood. When they went inside my home to investigate, they found my best friend dead on the floor, covered in blood. They brought me in for questioning, and I tried my best to explain to them about the package I received with the old cassette tape and how it forced me to commit the crime. The investigator just looked at me with disgust. I knew he wasn't buying it. Heck, I wouldn't believe it either if I was him. I start my arraignment in a few days, and my lawyer is telling me that it isn't looking good for me. I just keep going back to the day where I received that package, how things would have never turned out the way they were if I had just ignored it. And who and what was that voice? Whatever it was, I now have to face the consequences of my actions.